นะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะพุทธังธัมมังสังฆังนะมัสสามิ Blessings to you all. During the meditation, I was just talking a little bit about cultivating Parami, the spiritual perfections, or these 10 qualities that we often talk about. In fact, many of the scholars will point out that the Buddha hardly mentioned this term much at all in his teachings, mainly in relation to his past lives, where he said in different lives he was cultivating certain paramis, perfecting them. But in his teachings it's not a term he really used very much, and yet nowadays it is a term we use a lot because it's a very convenient description of the different kinds of spiritual qualities we're cultivating in the path to end our suffering, to cultivate the noble path, abandon the mental defilements that cause us suffering. Yeah, it's a useful phrase and system to talk about what we're doing. So you hear it a lot in talks and discussions, particularly on meditation and just general spiritual practice. And the first problem with that is that people have their different interpretations of the word parami, so it's often used in a worldly sense as well. We often talk about someone with parami who's maybe very well known for something, they're famous, celebrity, or they're a skilled person who has a skill such as a musician, actor, or sports star, or a businessman, woman who's made a lot of money, made a name for themselves. We often say, well, this person has parami. Or someone with power, a politician in power perhaps. But that's worldly parami, and usually associated with worldly success such as wealth, fame, fortune, power and so on. Spiritual parami is not necessarily manifesting in the same way. And so, the Buddha himself gave up his worldly parami to leave the palace and go out into the forest, and was often considered to be someone, certainly in the beginning, the earlier part of his life, as someone without much parami. Buddhist monks and nuns, they have no property, no power, no wealth. So often they're not recognized as people with parami, and they're occasionally even criticized, looked down on, dismissed as unimportant, or beggars, parasites. Sometimes we get called different names, and even the Buddha was sometimes treated like that. People looked at the Buddha, even though he was already enlightened, say after his enlightenment experience, they looked on him sometimes as not knowing the truth, not being fully enlightened, and so on. Didn't give him the recognition that he really, you might say, deserved. But the Buddha left his wealth, fame, fortune, power behind to cultivate the spiritual path, and he relied on these spiritual paramis, perfecting them. One of the ways we define a Buddha is we say the Buddha cultivated the 10 paramis on every level. The normal level is the level you might say we're normally practicing cultivating dana barami, is generosity, renunciation, nekama barami, sila barami, morality, virya barami, persistent effort, kanti barami, patience, satya barami, focus on the truth and seeking of the truth, adhitthana barami, this determination to, or the quality of determination, metta barami, goodwill, which also includes the other Brahma Viharas, mudita, karuna, upekkha, but then also upekkha barami, equanimity. And wisdom barami is, of course, panya barami. And the Buddha perfected those on every level, to the deepest level. So we say the normal level is just parami, the intermediate level is upabarami. So cultivating those qualities in the face of maybe greater obstacles or to a intensity or a strength that they're not easily shaken from the mind or lost in one's practice, from one's mind. Or to the highest level, paramatta barami, which is often characterized as being willing to sacrifice one's whole life for the barami, for the practice, for nibbana, which is sometimes a quality that one needs to have, like the Buddha sitting under the Bodhi tree. He had made that solemn adhitthana barami, that he wasn't going to rise or to get up until he had penetrated the truth and ended suffering and ended the round of the cycle of birth and death. So he said whether all his blood dries up and his muscles and flesh shrink away, shrivel up, and he's just a skeleton sitting there, he's not going to get up until the job is done. So complete, utter determination to do it. Because on that level, the Buddha, practicing to the level he's ready to sacrifice his life for the Dhamma, for Nibbana, it's not something he undertook lightly. He was ready to do that, to make that resolution. And he'd even had a number of signs previously that gave him the confidence to do it. He felt he was ready to finally let go of everything and every obstacle and cultivate his mind, or purify his mind from every kind of delusion and attachment. He was ready for that. We are practicing, you might say, on a more normal level, normally speaking. Occasionally you meet people who've done extraordinary things and used their life and their practice in extraordinary ways to these deeper levels. But we're all practicing cultivating Parami in one way or another. And this one I mentioned earlier, Adhitthana Parami, is one that we need to keep coming back to as a way to strengthen our determination in the practice. Whether it's just to complete acts of dana, acts of generosity that we've decided to do, you need determination to carry something through perhaps. And we all know what it's like to have a good idea. I want to go and help this person, or I want to go and support Sangha somewhere, or do something, some charity. But so often it is and just remains an idea, and we may not actually put it into action or complete it. And we have lots of good ideas, but whether we actually do them in action is a different thing. Or sometimes we say we will, and we intensify our adhitthana parami. We don't just think it, we say it, but then we still don't do it. There's these three levels of practice in body, speech and mind, and sometimes one or two of them are developed and one is neglected. The same with sila. Sila is a parami in itself, dana is parami in itself, but then adhitthana parami helps to bring these qualities to completion as well. So like sila parami, we all know about undertaking precepts, which is a form of adhitthana, isn't it? We call it samatthana when we talk about precepts, but really it's adhitthana as well, where you say, today I'm going to keep the 5 precepts or the 8 precepts, whether you're in a monastery and you come into the monastery for a period of time, or even if you're at home, or if you ordain as a novice monk or a monk. It's a form of adhitthana where you undertake to follow the training rules of an anagarika or a lay practitioner or a novice or a monk. And then you have to carry through with that. Say, as a Buddhist monk, you have to keep your Vinaya training rules every day, as long as you're wearing the robe, shaved head, and determined to be a Buddhist monk. You have to follow the rules of training, which are quite extensive, every day. That in itself summons up effort, which is another Parami, Virya Parami, but also this adhitthana, just determining to keep the rules, do the practice of a monk. Whatever level you're practicing on, whether it's 5 precepts, 8 precepts, or the Vinaya of a monastic, it takes many different qualities to keep precepts, even just for one day, but then for many days, months, years. It's a repeated action, it requires repeated determination. And this is one principle that the Buddha used in his teachings and in training people. The understanding that if we repeatedly do skillful things, train our mind skillfully, speak skillfully, do skillful things, that brings up good habits of body, speech and mind, which bring their own good results back to us and probably make our whole practice of training this mind to let go of the causes of suffering better, more effective through repeated action. And say, like with precepts, it gets easier, doesn't it? If you keep precepts consciously, knowingly, with a sense of determination every day, we get more used to it. And you see that all the time in a monastery, where people may, in the beginning, come into the monastery and not even keep the 5 precepts that well. But once they're in the monastery, they accept that this is a place where they may take on the 8 precepts or even train for higher ordination, and they start training. And at first it's quite difficult. You have to be mindful of what you say, what you do. It seems like of every little thing. You walk through the forest and it's very easy to squash a fly or a mosquito or tread on an ant. You might not do it intentionally, but still the doubt might arise if you feel an itch and you put your arm down and squash something without realizing. You start to notice what's going on around you much more once that's happened, and then you become more careful. You become more careful with your speech in a monastery, as everyone knows, and you tend to be more mindful and avoid swearing, lying, abusing others if you can. You try at any rate. And your speech improves, doesn't it? You develop this discipline around the use of material things, what we call sila, based on the use of the requisites in a monastery. But at home it's the same thing, getting to be mindful of what you consume as an individual living in society, whether you are in a monastery or at home. This is part of our practice, and you can determine how much money you will spend, what you will spend it on, how you use your time. Just as a monk in a monastery might do that in his own way. He doesn't have an income, but he has some modest requisites and items that we use. So then you have to think, what is the right way to use these material things and what's the purpose? Well, the same at home. When you buy food and make food or eat food, you can introduce the same reflections that a monastic might. I know it's tempting because there's so much good food out in the world these days, the way the society is. We're all tempted to eat just for the taste and the fun of it. Well, you might make a determination to eat mindfully and maybe eat in silence, which is a big ask because there's so much social engagement around food. But say as a monastic, we eat in silence so that we can be mindful of why we're eating, what we're eating, how much. As a layperson, you can try this as well, at least sometimes. Maybe if you keep 8 precepts on a day, for a day and a night, you learn how much food do you need if you just eat in the morning. And then you can make a determination to eat just this amount of food, or just, if you're keeping 8 precepts, you say, I'm just going to eat before noon, whether it's once or twice, and so on. You know, we can use adhitthana parami over and over again with often very mundane things in our life, whether we're a layperson or in the monastery. I was suggesting earlier to use adhitthana parami as your sitting meditation, especially once you become more used to meditation, more familiar with the posture, the technique, whatever technique you're using. Get more used to it, more used to some of the obstacles and how to deal with them. As you become more comfortable meditating, more used to it physically, your body is more used to sitting or walking, and mentally you're more understanding of what you're doing and why, then maybe you can take on more in the way of adhitthana parami, and you might, if you know how to sit for 20, 30 minutes, 45 minutes without moving perhaps, you might take on 1 hour. And slowly, in small ways, incrementally, you increase the length of time that you sit or walk meditation without stopping, without giving up for a period of time. Just like we learn to use the precepts and can take them on more easily, more readily, well, with meditation, say that the amount of time you do meditate, how often you meditate, and so on, you can increase your effort in the practice by taking on small tasks or completing adhitthanas, determinations that you've made, such as to sit for a certain amount of time without getting up, without stopping. This is one that many, many meditators and great teachers, enlightened masters have used to improve their parami. You take on a task such as sitting meditation, you might be practicing mindfulness of breathing or any other meditation technique to bring up mindfulness. But you also use adhitthana in the sense you say, I'm going to sit for 30 minutes or 1 hour or even 2 or 3 hours, depending on your experience, your age, your physical health, and so on. But whatever, you find ways to bring up more effort in your practice by using adhitthana. So it could be relating to how often you meditate, how long you meditate for. It could be with your precepts, what precepts you take on and how well you take them on, how sincerely you are in keeping to them. Sometimes we create our own area of practice which we use adhitthana for. So some people, they see a certain weakness that they need to address. So it could be making an adhitthana about what time you get up in the morning, or how many hours you're going to sleep at night, or what time you go to bed at night. And you just make a simple rule for yourself. We might call it a rule, of your own rule, but it's actually an adhitthana, isn't it? If you say, I'm going to get up at 6 a.m. so that I got more time to meditate, for example. And you meditate through till 7, for example, or you do some chanting, if you like chanting and find that helpful, and then do meditation, or you listen to a Dhamma talk and meditate together, or whatever. You may make your own determination to do something that you find helpful to you in your practice, and then you stick to it. One of the important things is to not take on too much too quick, because then it's disappointing when we break our determination or can't fulfill it, and we often turn on ourselves and want to punish ourselves. And even some determinations people they do make as a sort of punishment when they feel guilty about their previous indulgence or laziness or lack of effort. And then they sometimes make the determination with the wrong attitude. So they say, oh, I've been eating too much, I'm not going to cut out all my favorite food, or eat one meal less a day, or eat less a day, or whatever. And then they punish themselves, and they may or may not be able to complete the determination, but they do it with a sense of being punished, so the mind is already in a more negative state, rather than training the mind to bring up mindfulness and learn and develop wisdom and understanding. They're just trying to force the mind to be a certain way, or punish them, take it out on them. This can happen. So self-aversion can be mixed up with some determinations and adhitanas, and that's not the way the Buddha practiced. Before he was a Buddha, maybe he did. We know about the period he was doing very strict ascetic practices. But his attitude and the view lying behind those ascetic practices was not yet in line with the Dhamma. He noted this and said, I was involved with, you might call it self-harm, self-mortification, where he pushed himself physically to try and drive out his greed and anger and delusion, his attachments, but failed. Then he came back to the middle way. And this is one of the challenges in our practice of precepts, even dana, as well as meditation. Finding the middle way is not always easy. Sometimes we push too hard, sometimes not enough. And it's often trial and error or experimentation that we're learning. But we can use the framework of the 10 Paramis as something to return to reflect on, to see whether these qualities are present or not, or if they're present, how easily they're shaken. As the Paramis, one way we talk about them is they're these qualities that are present in the mind, at least in part, all the time. They're strengths that we draw on, they're qualities that we can return to and bring up, sometimes in an instant. They're kind of there, ready to be used, ready to be brought out. We may need to develop them further, of course, through practice, but there's already something there. That's one way of defining Parami. It's quality that is there and sticking with you, and you keep nurturing it and keeping it in mind, so they become unshakable. Like the Buddha, in some of his previous lives where he was threatened or bullied or going through great hardship, poverty, illness, all kinds of trouble. He didn't lose his Parami in these different situations. So like when he was, there's all the stories like when his monkey king, when he was leader of the monkeys and looking after his herd of monkeys and finding them food and finding them a really good mango tree on the side of the river, so they're all enjoying eating these tasty mangoes. So he's looked after them, fed them, protected them, but then there was a hunter stalking them, and the Buddha went out to face the hunter, let his troop of monkeys escape, and then he went out to face the danger on his own, and the hunter caught him and smashed him on the head with a rock, but he didn't lose his kindness and compassion for the hunter. And then the hunter, his karma really got back to him quickly, and he was fell injured, and he himself was now dying. And the Bodhisattva, the Buddha to be, even though he was injured and he'd been tricked and trapped by this hunter, he turned around and cared for him because he had Parami. Kindness and compassion wasn't shaken by the bad behavior of another person trying to kill him and the other monkeys. And you can look in society, in your own life maybe, or hear stories about many people who display all kinds of good qualities in the face of danger or injustice or just the difficulties of life, putting up with difficulties, but sticking to their guns, sticking to their practice. And people who learn to meditate and keep meditating even when they're ill have amazing Parami, don't they? They have a lot of pain. Sometimes we meet as monks, we meet people who want to meditate or do meditate, and they may have terrible injuries, or they're ill or getting very old and weak, but they stick to it, they don't give up. They're willing to train their mind in mindfulness right to the end, or use it to help manage their pain or their difficulty. This is Parami. And Paramis are qualities that get tested over and over again. Whether you can maintain your effort in the practice, or keep your precepts, or maintain your renunciation in the face of temptation, or whether you can maintain your metta in the face of hatred or cruelty. These are often quite inspiring stories, which are probably why the Buddha would tell stories about his previous lives, because when you hear them, you get inspired, motivated to do the same, to follow suit, and this supports our practice. Of course, a lot of our life and our practice is fairly mundane, ordinary, but still, you come back to Parami, don't you, when you're bored in your meditation. Your Parami may kick in and say, well, I'm going to keep doing it. Or your Aditana Parami says, I'm going to finish this period of meditation I determined to do. Say you're determined to sit for half an hour or 1 hour, and you're feeling bored, restless, but you stick with it. You don't give up. Or if you're sleepy, which is a huge problem for many meditators. So many meditators, as soon as they start to feel drowsy, they'll stop. They're not satisfied with themselves, maybe they're annoyed that they're sleepy, and they quickly go into a sense of, oh, this is a waste of time, I'm falling asleep. So they quit, go and do something else. Which occasionally may be the right thing to do, sometimes it is, but often it's actually a weakness, isn't it? It's not facing up to the obstacle, so then you never learn to get over it. The way we make Parami is actually facing the challenges and the obstacles and finding ways to get through them, to grow, to learn. So in the case of sleepiness, sometimes you just sit through it. This is how Ajahn Chah taught. And you can get up and walk meditation as well, and that's often a very useful thing to do. But sometimes you just have to sit through it. And you feel the drowsiness come on. You feel the dullness, the drowsiness, the darkness, the dark clouds start to envelop your mind. Maybe you go into a sort of dream state and you're not aware of your body or the breath anymore. But instead of quitting, you stick with it. And you're hunting or searching for a way to re-establish mindfulness. You're sticking with it, so you have Khanti Parami, you're patient with the problem. You have Virya, effort, the effort to establish mindfulness when you're nodding or drowsy or dreaming. Maybe you have metta, you have goodwill for yourself because you're not giving in and you're actually trying to do something that's useful and beneficial for yourself. You have upekkha Parami because you're practicing equanimity towards the particular hindrance or problem that's arisen, and so on. You're using the Paramis, and maybe you're using Aditana Parami to stick with it. I'm not going to get up even though I'm really sleepy. And myself, many other monks I know, done this over and over again through their life and learned to shrug off sleepiness, maybe for a few minutes, a short while, caught into sleepiness, but then re-establish mindfulness. And the mind is brighter, clearer, more awake than before, because you've shrugged off that sleepiness, so then of course it can't bother you, at least for a while. And this is how monks manage to stay up meditating all night. It's not that they don't face sleepiness, but they go through it, using these Paramis, and they make Parami in the process. Ajahn Chah used to say, oh, this monk is making Parami. He's sitting there, falling asleep, waking himself up, sitting up straight, pushing through it, learning to maintain mindfulness until the samadhi is established. When samadhi is established, the mind is bright. That's the nature of samadhi. The mind is bright, peaceful, one-pointed, energetic. There's a certain automaticness. It feels automatic, what you're doing. There's a naturalness to it. And of course, you're not sleepy during that time that samadhi is established. If you sit for a long time, well, of course, drowsiness may return. But when samadhi is established, there is no drowsiness. And if you experience that late at night at a time when you're normally asleep, but then you found, oh, I've managed to maintain my samadhi and my awakeful state, 1 a.m., 2 a.m., 3 a.m., or you get a boost in your practice, you get the confidence, you get an increased strength of mind that you can rely on again, or come back to again and say, well, I've done it before, I can do it again. It's just the same as somebody competing in some form of game or sport. You win, well, you get confidence to compete again. Even if you lose, because you've won before, you may not be too put off by losing, and you know you can win, so then you try again. It's the same with training this mind in the Dhamma: sila, samadhi, panya, generosity, morality, calm and insight meditation. You may have lost out to various mental defilements, hindrances before, but because you've overcome them, you get some confidence to keep trying. That's Parami in itself. And you develop these different qualities to carry through. And that's another aspect of Parami, is it helps to carry you through the challenges and obstacles, the difficulties, the hard times. So those people who become enlightened, whether it's the Buddha or monks and nuns or even lay practitioners who practice well, they develop Parami to the point where whatever comes their way, their Parami doesn't depart, doesn't leave them. Old age, sickness, the face of death, even in facing death, hardship, threats from other people, nasty words of other people, poverty, lack of things, lack of comfort, lack of pleasure. So many practitioners over the centuries have proven that Parami are these sort of semi-invisible qualities. You don't always see them immediately, but you may sense them in a person. When you've practiced yourself, you may notice them in someone else. But they're semi-invisible, but they are qualities that people have developed and relied on and taken them all the way to enlightenment, nibbana. Ajahn Mahabua used to say, some people, they meditate and they're not thinking in this way, so they're just putting in the time. A bit like, you go to work and you clock in the morning, you clock out at night, and like, I put in the hours, now I can get the paycheck. But Parami doesn't work like that, the Dhamma doesn't work like that. It's also about quality of mind. You can sit with Parami or you can sit without Parami. Sitting without Parami is like you're just sitting. And I don't mean it in a Zen way, sitting is just sitting. I mean, you're not doing anything. You're either falling asleep, dull, mind wandering all over the place, no mindfulness is improved, no Parami is made. That's quite possible. Walking the same, just walking back and forth, sitting, but the mind is not really being raised. Because Parami, when you make it, is raising up the level of the mind. It means real, sincere effort. Sometimes it means battling with your own mind, training the mind, putting up with all your moods and emotions, the complaints, the voice, the endless voice, the chatter, the distraction, the sleepiness, everything, putting up with it and working out how to get through it. Learning how to let go of anger. When people give you a hard time, Parami is not responding with anger, but responding with, at the very least, tolerance and patience, but ideally kindness and compassion as well. Not easy, but this is Parami, isn't it? Learning to be the opposite of what, if you are encountering some difficult person who's verbally abusing you, physically threatening you, bringing up the opposite, bringing up the peace, the calm, the tolerance, the kind words in the face of harsh words, and so on. This is making Parami, when we are willing to forgive even if somebody has hurt us badly. You could say, what's the alternative? If somebody hurts you, you just hold on to anger indefinitely with a grudge. It's understandable if someone's hurt you, but what good is it doing? It's not doing them good, not doing you good. We actually have to learn to let go of that anger so that we can move forward, progress. That's Parami. The way people can do that is they've learned to do that, not to hold on to anger, because they know that is a cause of suffering. It's a blemish. It can be very energizing, and often we are energized by our anger, but ultimately it burns us up, it destroys other good qualities. Doesn't mean to say a Buddhist practitioner is just passive, defeated, the doormat. Sometimes we're a doormat. But we're also learning to energize, but without anger, without the energy of anger. Energize for the Dhamma, for the truth. So Satya Parami, Adhitthana Parami energizes the mind. Virya Parami. Every one of those Paramis can bring up energy to fight injustice, or to get beyond problems, or to get beyond, when somebody's giving you a hard time, but in a way that is not unskillful, without going to anger, hatred, revenge, cruelty, and so on. Parami is like this. Paramis brighten the mind, energize the mind. So sometimes we have to consciously go back to our Parami. So Adhitthana Parami is a very good way to do that. You make your plan, and you maybe not do it for the rest of your life, but you make a plan, or a resolution to do something for a period of time. Something that's doable within the realms of possibility for you, whoever you are. You don't take on too much, because then you defeat yourself. But you say, well, I've sat meditation for 30 minutes before, or 1 hour before. This is now what I'm going to do once a day, or even twice a day, or whatever. Whatever you think will help you improve your practice, you just take on a little bit more than you did before, and you stick to it. This is making Parami, and this is Parami. So say you determine to sit for an hour every day, that's what you work on. You've done it before, you're going to do it again. Or if you can't manage an hour, or maybe 30 minutes or 20 minutes, whatever period of time, and then you stick to that every day. You could even say stick to it religiously. That's a term that often people don't like to use nowadays. They say religion sucks, religion stinks. They don't like using that word. But actually, it has a meaning. It means doing something in a very determined, committed, sincere way. And stick to your meditation practice like that. Learn to sit still for a period of time, whatever is coming up in your mind, whatever the thought, the mood, the feeling. Can you do that? This is Parami. And you think of the Buddha, he could do it all night long. We may not be able to do that, but we can do for a 20-minute period or a 30-minute period. Same with the precepts. Go through a whole day without killing, stealing, committing acts of sexual misconduct, without lying, without taking intoxicants. You do it one day, and then you can repeat it another, and then another, and then another. And this is another principle in Buddhism. You're working on the present moment, what we call the Paccuppanna Dhamma, practicing today, at this time. So you don't have to think so much, will I be doing this in a year's time, or what will I be doing next year, or am I going to spend my whole life meditating with this terrible mind that's all over the place, or am I going to be keeping precepts which are so hard to keep for the rest of my life? You don't actually have to think in that way. You could just work on today, doing your best and bringing up some of these qualities of the Parami today. Just give in to the practice, give up to the practice and do it for a day or for the present moment, and let the future take care of itself. You don't need to go there in your thinking. As far as the past goes, well, you can draw lessons from the past. So if you've done something before, you know you can do it again. Or if you've done so much before, you've sat meditation for an hour before without moving, well, now you can do it again, or you can even do more. Maybe now I'll do an hour and a half. So you've kept the precepts, you managed to give up swearing, arguing, drinking, whatever it is. If you've done it before, then you can do it again. For your benefit and the benefit of others. The reason we develop Parami is not for any other reason than for our benefit and the benefit of others, for our happiness. But Parami implies doing things with effort, sincerely, training, developing, cultivating. They're qualities that we cultivate. They're not things you can just buy or just have just like that. Even though we use that term, as I said earlier, with the worldly Parami. If you're born into, a wealthy, influential family, people will say, oh, that child has such Parami, such good fortune. And they do on that level. But whether they do on the spiritual level is a different question. And you'll notice, a lot of the enlightened masters say that I knew and lived with and trained with, born into very poor families, and they had little education and they had lots of obstacles, poverty, lack of opportunity, lack of privilege, harsh conditions to contend with, but they actually came through it with Parami and realized enlightenment. So Parami, there's two levels. There's the world and there's the Dhamma. They're not always matching. Sometimes a lack of worldly Parami can inspire one to develop the spiritual Parami. It's not what we necessarily seek, or certainly our loved ones won't seek that for us. They all want us to be successful and what we call a success in the world. But in fact, spiritual Parami in the long run is much more valuable to us. So maybe I'll leave you with those reflections tonight, and we can talk a bit more afterwards, see if there's any questions.